So at the Congress of Vienna, there would have been people from countries all across Europe, presumably who came with different fashions and social customs. How do you dig into that from so far in the past, 200 years almost in the past, and figure out all those variations to write your book?
It's definitely a challenge suddenly, after a long time writing about mostly British characters, to suddenly have characters from all over Europe, and to realize I'm fairly comfortable with Regency Napoleonic fashions, but you suddenly find yourself thinking, well, would people from that country have been likely to be wearing muslin? Would they have been likely to be wearing, which fabrics would they have used? The basic sort of empire waist style dresses were fairly common across Europe, but there obviously styles would get to different countries at different times, and I have resources I can look up, but they're mostly British and some are French, for what was in and what year. So that's definitely been a challenge. I've tried to look at a lot of the notes in the accounts of the time of what fortunately people wrote a lot of very gossipy letters and journal entries about the Congress of Vienna, so you get accounts of what people were wearing. So I've tried to look at those a lot. There's also been the challenge of there were a lot of events at the Congress. I've never written a book with so much pageantry in it and so many sort of court scenes, which is really fun. It's very different from Secrets of a Lady, which takes place very much and largely in the London underworld, or Beneath the Silent Moon, which is largely on this wild, the isolated Scottish castle. So there are a lot of events where there was particular dress, like the masked ball that occurs early in the book at Metternich's Summer Palace. The ladies were all supposed to wear regional dress, so you have to try to figure out what kinds of regional dress. Well, one thing, for the real people, can you learn what they actually were wearing, and then the costumes you have to make up, what regional dresses might you use, and what would they look like. And then at the carousel, the tournament at the Spanish Riding School, the ladies who were in the Court of Love wore sort of more medieval, more Renaissance than medieval gowns and veils, and mostly in velvets. And there are accounts of some of them, so then you make up the one. I actually have my heroine involved in that, and I had to make up a dress for her. And then the men were in more Renaissance kind of doublets than actual armor, like in a tournament. So you have them in those kind of clothes, and then the spectators wore a profusion of jewels at that event. So there's a lot of both research of accounts of what people were wearing, and then a lot of imagination to try to fill in the gaps. The court customs were fairly similar across Europe. There were some. I've read about that hand kissing apparently was particularly a Viennese thing, although certainly people kissed hands in other countries. They certainly did in England at the time, but I've read about that being talked about as being Viennese, so I've tried to use that more. And then you constantly find, I'll come up against things that I think I take for granted that something's said a certain way, and then I realize, well, it's that way in Britain, or maybe it's that way in France, but am I sure it would be that way in Austria, or what about a Russian who was visiting Austria? So it is constantly a challenge, and I hope I'm getting things as right as possible.